Okay, so should we get started? We're at our appointed time. So, I'll call this to order. And as I was saying, what I'd like to do is go through and just do a bit of intros. It looks like we've got an intimate group here, a petit comité, so this should be a fun discussion. What I was mentioning was Jennifer and I had been recently on the panel, and what Steve Knight had done is just sort of go through and introduce everybody and then give people a chance to add anything to that introduction that was missing. So I've just gone through the list here of attendees as it was given to me. So first on the list is Dr. Edward Abrams, who is the president of the Personalized Medicine Coalition, an education and advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C., representing innovators, scientists, patients, providers, and payers. PMC promotes the understanding and adoption of personalized medicine concepts, services, and products for the benefit of patients and the health system. It has grown from its original 18 founding members in 2004 to more than 228 today. Previously, Dr. Abrams was the executive director of the Pennsylvania Biotechnology Association, where he spearheaded the successful effort that led to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's investment of $200 million to commercialize biotechnology in the state. Earlier, he'd been assistant vice president for the federal relations at the University of Pennsylvania and held senior administrative positions at Brown. Next on the list of presenters is Dr. Jennifer Miller, who's an assistant professor at Yale School of Medicine and director of the Good Pharma Scorecard, an index that ranks pharmaceutical companies on their bioethical performance. She's also the founder of the nonprofit Bioethics International. Her research focuses on the ethics of the pharmaceutical industry, specifically developing and using metrics to enhance accountability and social responsibility around how clinical trials are designed, conducted, and disseminated, and the accessibility of new medicines and vaccines. She also works on the ethics of medical and health data sharing and reuse in biomedical research. Prior to joining Yale faculty, she was an assistant professor at NYU School of Medicine. Next on our list, we have Dr. Kenji Shibuya, who is director of the Soma COVID Vaccination Medical Center in the city of Soma, Fukushima. He was previously professor and director of the Institute of Population Health at King's College London. Before joining King's, he was professor and chair of the Department of Global Health Policy at the University of Tokyo and coordinator of the World Health Organization. Dr. Shibuya has been an advisor to both the central and local government, and most recently he was senior advisor to the WHO Director General and a member of the Scientific Advisory Committee of the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, a pandemic vaccine fund investing in COVID-19 vaccine. Next, we have Dr. Laurie Glimcher, who's the president of Dana-Farber and CEO, scientist, and scholar. She was named president of Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in 2016, and she's also a professor at Harvard Medical School. Before that, she was dean at Cornell Weill and provost at Cornell as well. She's a distinguished immunologist, widely renowned for her work in the most promising areas of cancer research. She served on a series of boards, including currently serving on the board of directors of GlaxoSmithKline. Next on our list of presenters is Othman Laraki, who is the co-founder and CEO of Color, a distributed healthcare and clinical testing company. From population genomics program to high throughput COVID-19 testing, Color provides the technology and infrastructure to power large-scale health initiatives. Early in his career, Laraki spent several formative years at Google, where he worked on performance infrastructure and client-side software. After leaving Google, he co-founded Mixer Labs, which was acquired by Twitter. And at Twitter, he was vice president of product and scaled Twitter from what was initially a small app to what led to what I would say was the Arab Spring. Next, we have Pierre Schatz, who's managing director of PS Capital Management, GmbH. He's an entrepreneur and executive with over 30 years of experience in the life sciences. Prior to 2019, he was CEO of QIAGEN. He joined QIAGEN in 1993, where he served as CFO to 2004. He's held various positions before that. He was also commissioner of a German Corporate Governance Commission between 2001 and 2011, and between 2017 and 2020, he co-chaired the Precision Medicine Council of the World Economic Forum. Last but of course not least is Professor Sankai-san, who is a man who needs no introduction as the founder and director of CYBERDYNE, the very distinguished robotics company in Japan. He's also a professor at the University of Tsukuba and a fellow of many distinguished organizations and royal societies. It's a pleasure to have you, Professor Sankai-san. So with that, I'd like to just turn things over to each of the panelists to give their presentation. And as we've talked about, perhaps begin with Professor Sankai-san and then go to Professor Miller and then to Othman Laraki, and from there on. So, and I'm Carlos Bustamante. I'm a professor at Stanford on leave, living in Miami, and I'm running a small biotech company trying to build the biobank in the Americas. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll turn things over to Professor Sankai-san. You may be on mute.
Me? Okay. So can I start something? Okay, yes. So I would like to share my slides. So can you see these slides? Okay, yes. Anyway, thank you so much today. It's a great honor to have the meeting here. And today I would like to explain about some of the innovative cybernetics technologies. Okay, so anyway, cybernetics is one of the key technologies to fuse such kind of biological fields and such kind of technological fields in order to establish creates the fusion of humans and cyber physical space. And this one of the examples. So according to the human's intention signals, this system is not working, even for such kind of very severe person who cannot move their body, even these conditions. According to the human's intention signals, these cyborg type robots starts to work. And we could establish the new treatment method for very severe neuromuscular diseases and so on. And this one is one of the examples for the spinal cord injury patients. So she had an accident 5 years ago, and 2 years she stayed in bed, and almost 5 years she had a medical treatment, but she had such kind of very severe conditions, very strong scrums, and but 3 months later, so by using our technology, so she started to work, even after such kind of situation. And anyway, so these technologies now became one of the platform in several countries, even in the COVID-19 period. Okay, so similar technologies, Lambda type also prepared for elderly persons. Okay, and by using these technologies, even the bedridden person starts to work, or some of the person who lost the working functions, even this condition, so they can start to work. And all of these technologies connected to the internet system, communication systems through the internet. Then anyway, this technology now can be used even in the home. So this technology can connect the hospitals and the home. Okay, and so Such kind of vital sensing systems to detect these signals can also prepared for the hospital uses and home uses and non-medical fields and so on. Okay, so everything's connected through the internet. Then we can gather and analyze the patient situations, and also we can provide some of the treatment method to the hospital and to the home, even in that. So they can improve their physical function and they can control their health conditions by themselves. Okay, so now these technologies are used in Japan. Just started. So thank you so much. I quickly roughly explain about the outline. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Miller, would you like to go next?
Great. Can you see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
Yes.
Okay, super. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on this panel. I'm delighted to see some of you again and meet those of you that I don't know. So as Carlos mentioned, I run an initiative called the Good Pharma Scorecard, which is an index that is designed to rank pharmaceutical, biotech, and medical device companies on their bioethics and social responsibility performance. Why start a scorecard for the sector? We had some pretty simple goals when we started this publicly in 2009. One, we wanted to set some bioethics goals and targets for the sector and be able to track our progress on these goals over time, kind of following that old adage that what gets measured often gets done. And then we were hoping to be able to recognize and celebrate where there were best practices, as well as importantly, catalyze or incentivize better behaviors where we needed. And so the scorecard evaluates 5 to 6 key areas of operations for a pharmaceutical, biotech, or medical device company. We're looking at, you can also think of these as the 5 key categories of ethics considerations in research and developing a novel medicine, vaccine, or device. We're looking at how trials are designed, how they're conducted, the transparency and data sharing of a company, marketing practices, and ultimately the accessibility of any approved products. So for today's purposes, I'll just briefly show you how 2 of these, the rankings work in 2 areas. In terms of transparency and data sharing, if you have a novel product, a drug, device, or a vaccine approved, that's a trigger for being included in a year's Good Pharma Scorecard. I'll show you the 2019 rankings because the sample was just large companies. Now we look at so many companies, it's hundreds, it's hard to show results. But basically in 2019, we looked at large companies with a novel drug approved by the FDA. So here's the sample. You can see it covers a variety of products. What we want to see is all of the trials supporting an approved product. We want to see if the trials are registered, they have summary results reported, that the results are published, and that the companies or the sponsors have a commitment to data sharing. And we're measuring it 6 months post FDA approval of a product. It's a pretty generous metric, I would argue. And we're looking at 4 different categories or samples of trials supporting an approved FDA, looking at all the trials that a company conducted to gain regulatory approval of a product, then just those trials conducted in patients for the approved indication, and then a narrower sample, just those trials required to have trials registered, required to have registration and results reporting under US laws. And then we're looking at companies' data sharing practices. And so here is just some quick takeaways, what you see. The big takeaway is that we still have a substantial transparency challenge within the sector, even though we're looking at trials supporting novel product approvals, not trials for unapproved indications. And here what you see is that 11% of novel products approved by the FDA, sponsored by large companies, are fully transparent, have all of their trial results in the public domain. either in a registry or the medical literature. And if you narrow that sample to just trials conducted in patients for the approved indication, the percentage of products that fully meet this measure goes up, about 42% of products, but you can see it's still way below half. And part of this is because legally, in the US at least, companies are not required to disclose the results of all trials, only those that comply with a law called FDAA passed in 2007 and recently updated through the final rule. Even if you look at transparency from a baseline legal requirement, you still don't have full compliance. You're only finding about 65% of products even meeting baseline legal transparency requirements. And then of course, today, transparency means more than just reporting summary results. It means commitments to data sharing. And so we also developed data sharing measures and evaluate companies on their commitments to sharing individual patient level data with third parties upon request. And what we do here is we give companies a 30-day amendment window where if they do not like how they're scoring and they think they can do better, they're able to improve their procedures and will include in their company ranking this post 30-day amendment window. And here what you see is that 50% of large companies, low scoring large companies, will take us up on that opportunity and improve their procedures within 30 days of getting a low good pharma scorecard. We roll up the transparency measures into an overall composite score, and a company gets ranked every year on their transparency. So as I mentioned, now we rank a lot of companies because it's drugs, biologics, and medical devices. But one thing to take away is when we added the non-large companies, turns out the company size is a big factor in transparency performance, with large companies by far outperforming non-large companies. So large companies are doing better overall and lots of opportunity for smaller companies to improve now. And then we try to emphasize the positive. So we're emphasizing the leaderboard. What's positive? It's possible. Here's some examples of how to do it to create a race to the top. Really quickly, we also look at diversity and fair inclusion in research and equitable access to the benefits of research from a Western perspective, but also a global perspective. And I'll just mention two quick things and then wrap up. In terms of we look at diversity, inclusion, and representation in clinical research, and then equitable access to medicines and vaccines. So in terms of diversity and inclusion in research, we know that we tend to test drugs on healthy young white males in high-income countries that don't represent the patient populations in high-income countries, let alone the global distribution of burden of disease or condition targeted by a trial. So here's just one example. If you're thinking from a US perspective, these are cancer drugs approved between 2012 and 2016. And what you see is that older adults significantly underrepresented and patients identifying as Black underrepresented in comparison to the patient populations for the US. And then it turns out we actually can't even benchmark representation because often we lack transparency about the demographics of enrolled participants. So the new Good Pharma Scorecard coming out this year looks at, are we disclosing the demographics of trial participants? And then are they representing patient populations in the US? And then we're also looking globally. And the big takeaway is there's a lot of room for improvement here, as you guys know. And then we're also taking the global perspective and looking at where we're testing drugs, going very fast, but last two slides. We test novel drugs in a median of 26 countries, and they tend to be high-income countries. When we do include non-high-income countries, sponsors are not able to submit and receive FDA regulatory approval in those countries, raising some exploitation concerns that we would include countries in research and not provide them at least commercial access. And of course, commercial access to a product doesn't ensure that it's affordable or that there's enough supply. And there's disparities by income level and then also geography. So here you can see that, unsurprisingly, Europe, high access to products that they help develop within 5 years. Countries in Africa, very low access, even when they're helping develop products by supplying research participants in trial sites. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Othman, would you like to go next?
Sure. I think I did the sharing correctly.
There you go.
If I'm sharing my email instead of my slides, but I think these are the slides. Thanks for the opportunity. Maybe one thing I thought would be kind of interesting, I think, in the context of this group to cover that we found in our experience with color to be just a really interesting and huge surface area for opportunity for impact is that, overall, I think we, as a community, I feel we do an incredible job and through incredible resources at scientific discovery and advancing, medicine, both in terms of like, whether it's like, device on the device side or clinical discovery and so on. But one of the places where the frontiers, I think, where healthcare has been the most challenging and continues to be so, and especially most certainly in the US, but I think is actually a relatively kind of common problem, or set of challenges across, most countries, is the actual delivery of care in a way that's accessible to people. And so like the access to care oftentimes is one of the big hurdles. Like, there are incredible things have been discovered and developed, whether it's for economic reasons or sometimes even just like literally the logistics of delivering basic care and reaching people. And that really has been the focus of Color over time, where we started off as a genetics testing company that we were focusing on making basic genetic testing that's inexpensive and simple to use and so on. And one thing we discovered over time was that by far actually the biggest hurdle was less the science and the medicine and doing the technology correctly, but much more the challenge of reaching people who are traditionally the most difficult to reach, and that has been over time ended up becoming actually really the core of what Color is about, discovering for our self-discovery in some sense for us, where our biggest opportunity for impact was, and has been a big part of informing our strategy and evolution of the company. And so the way we think about what we do today is primarily as being dedicated to helping non-clinical institutions to design and provide their own healthcare programs to provide public and population health services. And what I mean by that is that the majority of care today is delivered by institutions who are not in the business of clinical care, right? Like whether it's public governments, so whether it's like at the federal, state, or local governments, they do a bunch of things, including roads, et cetera, but including delivering care. In the context of the US, large employers, for example, are responsible for covering care for about half of the care coverage in the country. Same goes, for example, for schools, universities. These are institutions that oftentimes have large populations for whom they're very deeply tied, and including the health services for those populations. And the question is, how do we enable them to actually deliver care to the populations for whom they're responsible? And that's become really our focus. In terms of just kind of context for scale and kind of the work that we've been doing. So over the last trailing 12 months, we've done about, and this is mostly US, but we've done about 20 million healthcare transactions with our tests, vaccines, consultations, and so on. One of the dimensions that's been also interesting is figuring out how to do this in community. So especially to reach more vulnerable populations, it is not about bringing them to care, but taking care to them. And it's not trying to bring people to the front door, but taking the front door into schools, churches, workplaces, prison systems, and so on. And so right now we run about 10,000 sites across the US, and these are run in community by the community providers, and where there are about 16,000 administrators or people who are actually running the operations of care from these institutions. So these are not necessarily always clinical providers and not Color employees, but rather enabling employer operations teams, for example, to serve their people. Like, when you think about how EMRs are designed in health systems today, they're designed around a centralized system, right? Like it is designed around, you have a software system that is to manage for your doctors and clinical staff in your buildings and in your system to manage care. And our approach here has been to actually, disseminate that operational, load into the community so that they're able to self-serve. And that's been, we found that to be quite impactful. This is just one example of one of the programs that we run. So we do a lot of work with the California Department of Public Health, where today we run with the state. It's been one of the big backbones for kind of the pandemic response and also the kind of ongoing preparedness for going forward. But we're using color software and infrastructure. The state is running thousands and thousands of sites across the state for testing, vaccines, and starting also on even medication delivery to take these basic services into these communities. The thing I would like to close with is, as we've been kind of working through this, and this is a bit different, I think, than kind of the lens that one would come from a research angle, but is one of the questions about what's happening in the industry overall and what's the format of some of the opportunity. And it reminds me a little bit of what's happened in other industries when we zoom out and look at how technology has impacted the infrastructure of other industries over the last 15 or 20 years. One of the interesting things I think that we've observed is that there's been this unbundling and rebundling of services and infrastructure for things that used to be, telephony, for example. All of the software services and infrastructure used to be the telco operators. And then fast forward 20 years, companies like Twilio, for example, have rebundled part of those services around messaging and taken provided infrastructure that's primarily cloud-based to enable every institution to have a messaging service. And and the side effect of that is that all of a sudden you have this great democratization of who can run services that include messaging, payments, and so on. And we believe actually with healthcare services, there is a similar opportunity. And that's kind of where I think there's, especially when we're trying to build things like to deliver healthcare at the edge, is how do you enable, what are the kind of building blocks to decompose how we think about basic care? And just to be clear here, in talking about this, it's less about, I think acute care is much harder to unbundle in terms of if someone needs to go get treated for cancer, get, surgery and so on, fundamentally you still need a lot of physical infrastructure. But when we're talking about basic health services, one of the, big, sorry, my microphone reconnected, that we've been focusing on is how to unbundle components of health services to enable our customers who are in public health and so on to design and build their own services in a way that's actually appropriate for their populations and the goals that they're serving. So that's kind of the kind of model that we're operating with and that we've been focusing on, that we think is actually provides an opportunity to take a lot of the incredible discoveries and incredible advances that we're making and reduce the transactional cost in order to deliver them to people.
Excellent, thank you. If I might take the chair's prerogative and just follow up a little bit on that, Othman, because I think you're definitely onto something with that theme, and I certainly believe there's a who's going to build the cloud infrastructure for bio type of big opportunity out there in the same way that AWS and Google Cloud and Azure have basically taken the data server business and transformed it to be more than simply storage, to add compute and then pro service on top. If there are common as you're saying, sort of products and services that can be bundled, then there's really opportunity to deliver that at scale, and dare I say, bring delight to healthcare, which has been, I think, part of the massive issue, at least in our country in healthcare delivery, right? You know, we spend more than any country, get worse outcomes, and people are exceedingly frustrated with the #1 industry in the country that has overtaken retail and manufacturing. So, you know, the degree to which you can bring healthcare into other sectors, into the workplace, into malls, into other aspects of American life, you may absolutely do well by doing good. So I'd love to maybe use that as a jumping point for any other comments that folks would like to make on this before we move on, just to see if there's a point here that others that resonate with others, and maybe a bright light here in the post-COVID world. Maybe Dr. Glimcher, I'd love your thoughts on this as a physician and director of a research center, but also somebody who's spent time on all aspects of these questions.
It's critical that everybody, wherever they come from and whatever their zip code is, to receive the highest quality patient care. And whether that's delivered in the hospital, in the outpatient setting, or at home. And we've just heard a little bit about what we can do at home. That's really, I think, you know, our mission as a cancer center. During COVID, we had a rough time, as did cancer patients. And I just want to make a comment about telemedicine. It's probably irrelevant, but, you know, telemedicine has been incredibly helpful for all hospitals to keep in contact with their patients and to bring in family members when they're not allowed to visit, but they can connect with their loved one through telehealth. So one thing I would say that's very important is that telehealth must continue, and it must be appropriately reimbursed, because this has opened a whole new field that can be more efficient and effective for both physicians and for patients, and especially for patients who often do not need to actually come in person, but can have their appointment virtually. And, you know, COVID, a silver lining in the cloud of COVID has been actually appreciation for telehealth and telemedicine.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that we saw at Stanford was, oh wait, we could turn telemedicine on overnight. You know, we went from, you know, a handful of visits to pretty much most visits, if not all visits, for some period of time. And we just had to figure out how to do it. And, you know, not that you can do everything by telemedicine, obviously not, right? But the degree to which we were limited artificially, I would say, in delivering care and the opportunities there, I think is something we don't want to let go by. You know, that's 100% true. Other comments on that? I didn't mean to cut you off, Dr. Glimcher.
10 telehealth a week to 3,000 per week in about weeks.
There you go. Other comments from the group, Dr. Abrams?
Well, I was just going to say briefly what Dr. Glimcher didn't tell us is that there's a movement in the United States Congress and CMS to cut back on telehealth.
Yeah.
It's incumbent upon all of us to demonstrate how important it's been to advancing care and improving care.
It's also at the state level, because we can now not do telehealth across states. Certain states will not allow that. You have to register your physician in that state. It takes a long time. As a leading cancer center, there are other states who don't want us to offer a opinion or to talk with their cancer patients, because many of them end up coming to Dana-Farber. So there's a little bit of that. And this is at both the state and federal level.
100%. 100%. So Dr. Glimcher, I'd love to sort of pass the ball on to you for your thoughts in general on the role of technology in accelerating the discovery in this post-COVID world. And
so it's no surprise, and I don't have any slides, that I'm going to talk about cancer, which we all know is the second leading cause of death. There have been 14 million deaths worldwide last year. 2 out of every 5 of us are going to experience cancer in our own lives. Now, the last 2 decades, as we all know, have been absolutely revolutionary with precision targeted medicines that disable genes that drive cancer, and that's been a wonderful progress. But as an immunologist, of course, I'm particularly excited about the field of cancer immunotherapy, which has revolutionized how we treat many cancers for patients across the globe. Transforming treatments to date, as you know, have involved checkpoint blockers and CAR T cells. But the truth is, right now, this only works, cancer immunotherapy only works for about 25% of our cancer patients. And it can be life-saving, but for the remaining 75% of our cancer patients, it simply doesn't work. And we know that we have to change this. And our goal at Dana-Farber is to learn more about why immunotherapy can be so effective among some patients with certain cancers, but not others, as well as to discover additional immunotherapy treatments for those patients who don't respond to the current therapeutics, which is the majority. And I want to focus on what I think is one very promising and novel new area. And that's the field of therapeutic personalized cancer vaccines. These aren't like prophylactic vaccines like the flu shot or the polio vaccine that prevent disease, although we hope at some point they will be. They are currently therapeutic cancer vaccines that are intended to treat existing cancers by, again, stimulating the immune system to recognize and kill cancer cells. And we know that the body's immune system has an ability to recognize and eliminate abnormal or malignant cells or pathogens in general, whether they be cancer or viruses or bacteria or allergens. But as we know, this mechanism frequently doesn't work because cancer cells have various ways of escaping from the immune response. The immune response becomes very immunosuppressed itself. So the goal of our cancer vaccine research is to somehow go circuit around the very immunosuppressive tumor microenvironment that surrounds the cancer to help the immune system identify cancer cells and give a stronger response against them. And I think we've really made some progress. Discoveries from Dana-Farber scientists actually, I think, lead the way in the development of a personalized cancer vaccine. And it's called NeoVax, and it is personalized. It uses the genetic makeup of a patient's tumor to create a vaccine that stimulates a very focused immune response and that can be further boosted by checkpoint blockers. And so what is NeoVax? Well, it's made from bits of proteins that are called epitopes that poke out from the cell surface of the tumor to activate the immune system. And these epitopes in NeoVax come from what we call neoantigens. And those are abnormal proteins that they're only on tumor cells, they're not on normal cells. And they give the red flag that the cell is a cancer cell and needs to be destroyed. And this is important, because neoantigens are only found on tumor cells, the immune response that gets triggered does, by and large, spare normal cells from attack. So to make, and this is the technology aspect of it, how do we make NeoVax? The sequence of DNA in a patient's tumor is scanned to identify the key epitopes within the tumor cell neoantigens. And those epitopes are clearly the targets for T cells, which are the most important cell in leading the immune system's attack on cancer. So for example, when a patient with melanoma is treated with Neovax, the epitopes activate an immune system response against any melanoma cell that displays them. And it turns out to work. And this is in a study from 2021 from Dr. Kathy Wu, one of our faculty members, has just shown that Neovax can produce long-lasting responses. So in fact, what Dr. Wu found was that nearly 4 years after patients with melanoma were treated with this personalized cancer vaccine, the immune response against melanoma lasted. This personalized cancer vaccine, it remained robust and effective at keeping melanoma cells under control. The study itself involved 8 patients who had undergone surgery for advanced melanoma that had metastasized and were considered obviously as very high risk for recurrence. Phase 1 clinical trial, they were treated with Neovax for about 18 weeks after surgery. And after 4 years of Neovax treatment, all 8 patients were alive, which is extraordinary for metastatic melanoma. 6 of them showed no signs of active disease. And when they analyzed the patient's T cells, which are, as I say, the brains of the immune system, those are the cells that actually kill your tumor, they found that these T cells not only remembered their initial target epitopes, but they had actually also expanded their repertoire to recognize other melanoma-related epitopes as well. And of course, that's really what we're looking for in an effective cancer treatment. The ability not only to work, but to produce a strong, durable response that will keep our patients healthy for years. And Dr. Wu and her colleagues have not stopped at melanoma. They have now created a vaccine for several different malignancies, and that includes kidney cancer. Clinical trials are in process, glioblastoma, which is an intransigent cancer, ovarian cancer, also an extremely difficult cancer to cure once it has spread, leukemia, and lymphoma. So these are some of the most difficult cancers to detect. They're silent cancers and to treat. But we're really very optimistic that by focusing on and building the strength of this technology, that we can eventually offer patients with these cancers and hopefully others more effective treatment options that can help them reach the best possible outcome. And immunotherapy has truly been a revolution in cancer care. And I think this is one way that we believe we can continue that revolution. So thank you for
Incredible.
sharing my thoughts.
Incredible. Again, I'm going to just take the prerogative and ask, because I've got you here. Immunotherapy for long haul. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I know there was a Nature Medicine piece a little bit ago, and there are folks, thinking about that. Is the Dana-Farber team working on that? Have you given some thought to how this direction could go, given all that we're learning about long haul and
You're talking about long haul COVID?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, long haul COVID.
Well, obviously, COVID-19 highlighted the importance of the immune system, which exists in virtually every organ of the body. Our patients with cancer, of course, were immunosuppressed. And so we had to take a special caution to make Dana-Farber a place that was safe for patients over the last 2 years. And I've had patients say to me, we feel safer at Dana-Farber than we do anywhere else because you have so many restraints in place. Whether, I think long haul COVID is still a mystery, right? We still don't understand the brain fog, the coughing, the loss of smell and taste, and whether that is related to the immune system or not. But we certainly know that in the setting of COVID-19, we're all focused on mRNA vaccines, right? It was unbelievable that within 10 months, mRNA vaccines were generated and developed. It usually takes 10 years. And I think this raises another question for how do we fight off cancer? And there are ways that I've just described how you can make cancer vaccines. mRNA is another way to go, and we're certainly looking at that. Ultimately, of course, when we think of our children and our grandchildren, we would love to have a multi-focused cancer vaccine, and that might be an mRNA vaccine, that you can get along with your measles, mumps, and chickenpox vaccines with a small child.
Excellent, thank you. What I'd like to do is maybe finish up with the remainders of the presentations and then get to general Q&A, unless others have pressing questions for Dr. Glimcher. Does that make sense? Great. Dr. Shibuya, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Carlos. It's great to join this very diverse group of people. So my background is more on the global health policy rather than technology and health system, but I'd like to speak a little bit about the future vision from our end. So I'm currently working at the Tokyo Foundation for Policy Research, but previously I was a senior advisor to Director General WHO, and also I was the member of the Scientific Advisory Committee for making pandemic vaccine, which is called CEPI. So we are talking about the post-COVID health systems and technologies, but the transformation started well before the pandemic took place. In fact, the pandemic has accelerated the transformation of health systems across the world. So I think there are 4 big tsunamis in health systems across the world. So that primary driving forces of health system transformation. So first, population aging. The second, epidemic of non-communicable disease. And thirdly, technology explosion, which drives costs, obviously. And finally, globalization. And in the past decade, in the global health policy, not just focusing on developed countries, but also developed countries, we focus primarily on the universal health coverage. But the global community has realized that we really need to get serious to develop resilient and equitable health systems in the context of universal health coverage movement. So when I was an advisor to health minister in Japan nearly 5 years ago, I chaired the Joint Future Health Working Group, which was jointly organized by the Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Health. This is a very tricky couple because Ministry of Economy tries to deregulate, whereas the Ministry of Health wants to regulate. So they are not getting along with each other most of the time. But luckily, I was asked to chair the commission, and I set the objective of the committee to look at the future rather than now, because if we talk about them now, they just don't get along with each other. So we look at the key elements of the health system in the future, let's say 2040, and look back what we should do now. So basically moonshot, backcasting type of stuff. And then there are several keywords that includes the keywords emerged, including supporting and empowering individuals, inconsistent with the precision medicine type of approach, and also the growing sense of community, and also harnessing mutual support, and embracing social and environmental change, not just the clinical or medical community, and also enhancing technological intelligence function. And finally, we discuss about redefining health, such as going beyond just life and death, and also realizing yourself, and eventually you as your own doctor. So obviously, enhancing technology and digital transformation of health systems is a key, but we should also address that according to the latest UN report, now health threats, including COVID and of course cancer and many other non-communicable diseases, becoming the new and critical human security agenda, along with threats from violence and conflict, which is ongoing in Ukraine, and digital technology and inequalities. So I'd like to briefly touch upon human security agenda, which is closely linked with many other sessions, I think, through this post-COVID summit. And I would like to focus primarily on health security. According to various data sets, people were on average living healthier, wealthier, and better lives for longer than ever. But the UN Development Program special reports suggest that there is a growing sense of insecurity, even years before the current pandemic took place. So and this feeling of insecurity had been growing in most countries, including a surge in some countries with the highest human development index values. And obviously the COVID pandemic and Russian invasion to Ukraine have now aggravated this trend. So one of the key questions we should ask is what accounts for a large gap between actual improvement in health and economic outcome and declines in people's perception of security. And let us examine the COVID pandemic to understand such issues as an example. So the paper published in The Lancet recently assessed quantitatively the factors associated with cases and mortality from COVID-19 in 177 countries for the period of 21 months since the January 2020, when WHO announced a global pandemic. And many of the variations across countries cannot be explained by population density, age composition, GDP, or obesity or seasonality. There are, of course, the major risk factors of COVID deaths or cases, but they are not necessarily explain the huge variation across countries. Of course, it is confounded by the coverage of testing or medical system, but they alone cannot explain the whole variation. But after adjusting for these well-known factors, usually cast of suspect, measures of trust in the government and interpersonal trust had larger statistically significant associations with lower case numbers of COVID-19. And high levels of government and interpersonal trust were also associated with higher COVID-19 vaccine coverage. So I believe that one of the key elements to alleviate health insecurity and enhance resilience in the future is trust. It's a little bit tricky term, but going back to the fundamental question, what accounts for a growing gap between improvement in health outcome and decline in people's perception insecurity? When the 1994 Human Development Report was published, the idea of human security challenged the conception of security and moved the debate from territorial to people. And now then UN 2003, as far as I remember, another report, Human Security, co-chaired by Professor Amartya Sen and Madame Sadako Gata, moved to this idea further and emphasized the protection and empowerment of individual by the core, which includes health, obviously. But we are facing new global, systemic, and interconnected threats beyond individuals and communities. So the latest report really affirms the relevance of the individual-centered approaches of protection and empowerment to advance human security. But at the same time, it also suggests to add an approach based on solidarity. And solidarity recognizes that human security must go beyond securing individuals and their communities to systematically consider interdependence across all people and between people and the planet. So for each of us to live free from want, from fear, and from indignity, we need to also embrace protection and empowerment and solidarity. And beneath these concept, the trust really matters now. So traditionally, global health policy and a global health system focus on delivery and the financing interventions or systems. But next generation may need to think seriously about how to harness trust in institutions, government, and also across, in terms of vaccines or technologies. So I believe that we will work together to promote open, transparent, and trust-based network of health systems at the time when the world is about to fall apart. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very, very interesting. Pierre, would you like to go next? I believe you know.
Sure, happy to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, I think there were so many really interesting comments made. So at the risk of repeating some of them, I took a step back and just looked at the question, how I think the innovation rate in healthcare will change post-pandemic. We obviously always have been talking about the pandemic risk as the industry insiders. In the risk report of the World Economic Forum, I just thumbed through it this morning, outbreak and pandemic was mentioned 50 times on 19 pages, but it was not seen as a top 20 risk on a short term. So it was always considered something very important, but not short term. Now we suddenly felt the impact and suddenly see how important it is to have also short-term options available. And it was very clear that we were very poorly prepared, despite even in areas we thought we were prepared, we were not. And we were, in many cases, quite lucky that we had technology available that allowed vaccines to be developed, and also the industry moved quite quickly. It became quite clear that the fallout of not being prepared is incredible. And so the world quickly mobilized and unleashed a pretty unprecedented response. And this included massive investments in infrastructure, but also in innovation. We're seeing public budgets for research and development around the world increase. And a lot of these increases are actually targeted at areas that have direct or indirect applications to pandemic tools and solutions. But what I personally thought was great was that the collaboration happened across the industry and the public ecosystem, which is not always the case. And we clearly saw this with the vaccines, where a lot of vaccines were co-developed in the public sphere. But we also saw it in diagnostics, which is traditionally an under-illuminated area of healthcare. It's, very few people knew about this space. It's 2% of healthcare. It, is traditionally much lower reimbursed, much less attractive and exciting to participate in than some of the large areas such as therapeutics. But the agility that suddenly was unleashed in diagnostics was massive. And I saw this in Europe. I started working with some young companies, and when the pandemic came along, we, within 6 weeks, created the largest testing network in airports. Actually, we were the first ones to implement test centers in airports in Europe, and kept the network up. And this was March 2020. So, literally a lot of the public policymakers told us this would not be necessary, but ultimately it kept the airlines going for quite some time. And obviously others joined, which was great. But the innovation rate has also been absolutely phenomenal, in particular in this space that I was working in during the pandemic. These included novel diagnostic tools. We're seeing hundreds and thousands of new ideas come up every day, and also resulting in some really breakthrough new technology, but also diagnostic infrastructure, surveillance tools. Still remember the idea of wastewater-based surveillance, which was a very exotic idea prior to the pandemic. Already tools had been implemented and created. And now all 50 states in the United States are implementing wastewater pandemic surveillance, and this can be applied to many other diseases as well. Digitization of the healthcare infrastructure. I was stuck in the pandemic in Germany, and most of the healthcare centers in Germany are still working on fax machines. And so, that was clearly seen as a major issue in ensuring information around the pandemic to be widely available. And that is obviously the first line of defense, is knowing where you have the pandemic. The rapid sharing of information, novel vaccines and therapeutics, tools and technologies for the effective, cost-effective development, manufacturing, and deployment of these vaccines, therapies, and devices were developed at record speed. And in many cases, just the education on the field, in many cases, even to the public, is massively accelerating public interest in better solutions, because people see what could be available. We talked about home solutions, that one was just described before. Even, things like people are doing their lateral flow tests at home, and suddenly see a value of knowing what disease potentially a child has, and being able to do that very quickly. Now, it is very clear that many of these tools and technologies that have been initiated for the purpose of the current COVID pandemic response, that they will have massive impacts, also far beyond their immediate purpose. And for that example, telemedicine was also one that I was thinking about. Laurie, I mentioned this before. This was heralded as a big breakthrough from general to mental health already prior to the pandemic, but it was still struggling to take off for all kinds of reasons, regulatory, reimbursement, and other reasons. And this trend has now obviously accelerated massively. Just hearing the numbers from Laurie was just incredibly impressive. And this also due to the massive adoption of telework in general, and we're probably going to see many more applications be able to scale in a much more meaningful way using these new tools. So in many ways, the pandemic can be seen as having an impact on many sectors of healthcare in a way comparable to almost to the moon landing project in the 1960s, where we said we really need to change something and we need to respond to something. But the big difference was that we can't wait 8-9 years for these solutions to come online, but the pandemic required immediate delivery of solutions. Now, immediate and healthcare is almost an oxymoron, and so the simple acceleration of the system has just been incredibly important, and to have a playbook now how things can be done quickly is, I think, going to have an impact far beyond the pandemic. We heard about cancer before, and others as well. So I would be amiss, obviously as a diagnostics guy, I would be amiss to not talk about that sector very, very briefly. And, the ability to deploy easy to use diagnostics, as well as to integrate them into digital ecosystems, have clearly shown to have, next to the vaccines, probably the most significant impact on the prevention of and containment of pandemics. And modern and more widely used diagnostics can have the potential to identify diseases or the risk of diseases at very early stages, where such diseases are much easier to contain, prevent, or treat. And similarly to their ability to contain a disease in a pandemic, catching diseases early can dramatically reduce also the economic value, and this has now become very, very clear, and the burdens of diseases. And hence, diagnostics that often, lived in the shadows, and ultimately the information that they provide, which were previously an underutilized tool, are suddenly now put into a very important position. And not only, for personalized medicine, we heard before about the neoantigen scanning that would have to be done prior to these more modern now therapies. The information around diseases will significantly increase around as we deploy new technologies going forward. So as an entrepreneur with a focus on the area of tools and diagnostics, I've never seen the innovation rate and the speed of adoption of new tools having been so massively accelerated in a short period of time. and at the same time, such a significant and broadly increased awareness of the economic and clinical value, and also public understanding of the value of these technologies altogether.
I couldn't agree more. I'd love your thoughts though on why it's also precipitated a biotech massive bear market. Because I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but you know, from February 2021 till today, I think everybody from Kathy Woods on down is down and down 60-70%. I mean, I think the private positions have probably done well to stay private, and maybe that's why you haven't seen. I mean, you know, Othman's up, and because that's probably, you know, private market valuations. But you know, you look at everybody else. I mean, it has been a tragic bloodbath.
So Carlos, I was a public company officer for 25 years. Yeah, my mistake. But the one thing you learn is never believe these short-term swings. The market traditionally will not take the same perspective as we do, which is a 3 to 5 year perspective. And from this perspective, you know, a lot of the tools and technologies that we're now developing and implementing will probably start kicking in that time frame, but they won't kick in next year or the year after that. But fundamentally, things have changed dramatically. And I do hope that the regulatory, the reimbursement environments, that they also notice that they need to adapt and increase the agility to respond to some of these new technologies, as they've shown their value now. And if we adopt them very quickly, they could show their value also for other diseases going forward.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't mean to be flippant. I mean, it has just been extraordinary to see, and one could argue these things were overvalued, and then we're ridden up precisely from March of 2020 through February 2021. It's, you know, and then you know, chickens coming home to roost. But and I would say particularly beaten has been cancer. I mean, or cancer stocks, right? I mean, if you look at all of the companies that had been out trying to do early detection, immunotherapy, I mean, everybody's had a slog. I mean, I could be wrong, and it could just be my particularly bad picking, but it seems to me that it has been a difficult and long winter.
You know, so grossly on steroids in terms of funding biotechs for over a year. I mean, it had to stop. It was, you know, whether, you know, Larry Summers suggests that we may be heading for a recession in the setting of high inflation. That may be true, but I think looking at the stock exchange is not a good measure of.
Yeah, no, 100%. But I mean, I find it really interesting to keep both the optimism of what we've learned through how rapidly we were able to develop, because I certainly felt that on the academic side. I think, you know, having spent a decade at Stanford, the last 18 months were radical in terms of how quickly we were able to innovate relative to everything leading up to it. And then having spent time in biotech and watching that, I mean, it was just sort of a wildly different swing. And so hopefully it will translate, and you know, again, would love others' thoughts on this. I mean, Othman, you lived it. I mean, you've been at the heart of this. So I'd love your thoughts, because you were, you know, you guys took a hard pivot in the direction of having gone initially from a diagnostics business into now really almost a public health business, I would say, which initially people would have said that's not very fundable, but you know, you certainly made it work. So, you know, I'd love your thoughts on this specifically.
I mean, I think maybe just a couple of perspectives on it that, and you know, I don't think anyone knows the future, but you know, we can. I think maybe the biggest thing we can do is to try to build companies and systems that are robust to different ranges of outcomes that are ahead of us. But like, I mean, two thoughts. I mean, one is that, and I feel it's actually quite similar to other boom bust cycles that we've seen with tech in other kind of contexts over the last, like, you know, 15, 20 years. Like, I mean, I feel like, you know, during the dot-com bubble and, you know, before the, you know, 2008, like, I think we go through cycles where funding is very inexpensive, and it creates a kind of, it has positive effects of creating a Cambrian explosion of ideas and, you know, exploration and so on, where effectively the private and public markets fund basic and fundamental research and things that are like, have just a very broad aperture. And in those contexts, I think like long-term economic viability is much less kind of sought after or a filter upfront. But then periodically there's kind of like a swing back that kind of then starts valuing durable viability. And I think it's, you know, very similar to what happened, I feel like, in the early .com. There were a lot of companies that were funded with kind of very broad spectrum of ideas, good and bad, but out of it came, you know, Amazon and Netflix and Google and et cetera. And because there were a few that had like sound fundamentals and business models, but I think in many ways they were also a product of that kind of like early exploration and of explosion of kind of exploration in different directions. And I feel with healthcare in some ways, I think that's actually, you know, I think the outcome will be a positive one in the long term, because I think what happened is that we had the window of time that catalyzed a lot of, you know, unconstrained or relatively unconstrained, you know, exploration of the kind of like surface area that is possible. And, you know, for, you know, what we did value, I mean, one of the parts of our direction over time had been to try to figure out what is kind of like a sound economic model. Like fundamentally, the way diagnostics works, especially in the US, like as an industry, is not a great financial model. Like it's kind of like it has a lot of the cost load of pharma, but none of the margin. So fundamentally, like you end up with like very difficult, you're caught between two worlds that are very challenging. Whereas, you know, I think where kind of, for example, where we evolved is to really, why we went down the public health route and so on, is to maximize impact, but also I think that's where, you know, you can have a more sound economic model by serving a much, much bigger population, right? Like when you're talking about, you know, tens of millions of people, like you don't need to make a lot per transaction. Like, for example, one thing that, you know, we were very proud of, for example, that what we, you know, some of our work in the last couple of years is that, you know, most of what Color did through the pandemic was like half of what even CMS reimbursement rates were, right? Like where we, you know, were able to deliver these services at a fraction of what even the government thought was an aggressive price. And I think that's where, like, you know, technology can have a big impact, is like to reduce that transaction cost and increase access. And so, so I think, you know, that's kind of like, you know, so I think like over the next like couple of years, I'm sure there's going to be a big kind of winnowing of, you know, companies that are forced to have an economic model that is durable and viable. And that includes not just, you know, the science, but also how do you get, you know, at the end of the day, right, like making scientific discoveries that stay locked up, you know, doesn't benefit anyone, right? Like it's kind of, so really the kind of, you know, the value really, you know, comes to fruition only if we're able to deliver products and services all the way to people, right? Like, whether it's for big pharma or, you know, smaller biotechs, like the distribution problem, you know, for example, you mentioned like early cancer detection, right? Like, you know, the irony is, right, like, you know, between, you know, whether it's Grail or all the, you know, a lot of other companies who invested a huge amount to make it possible to detect cancer earlier, the reality is like there isn't a good model to distribute that access. Like literally, right? Like how do you get, you know, average people, you know, blue collar workers and so on who are not getting their annual mammographies or et cetera, you know, assuming obviously like the tests work, et cetera, you can get like all the sensitivity, you know, to be kind of sufficient, you know, at a sufficient level and so on. Like we don't even have a distribution mechanism like that that's like both the logistics as well as the financial distribution.
Yeah.
And I think that's equally important problem to the science, right? And oftentimes that ends up being you know, the gap, right? Like and I think there's kind of just a long list of these missed opportunities of products that are truly population products that never reach your population, like, you know, very different area. Like you take some, like, you know, PCSK9 inhibitors, right? Like
I was
everyone
when you guys
kind of,
started,
like, spends any time with me hears me rant
FX
about them,
testing.
right? Like, you know, huge opportunity, but, you know, it's been the miracle drugs that are commercial failures because they can't reach people. So
just our clinical trials cannot be trusted unless we have diversity and inclusion in our clinical trials, which, you know, we're all working very hard on. And certainly in cancer, we do over 1,100 clinical trials a year. And, you know, what does it mean if you don't, people of different backgrounds, ethnicities can respond differently to different drugs, as we all know. And it's something that we need to take into account. I would also just, you brought up screening, and this was just awful for cancer because we had a 90% decrease in screening, mammography, colonoscopy, pap smears. And, you know, Ned Sharpless, the head of NCI, is proposing that we'll probably see increased mortality, about 10,000 people this year, because and patients are presenting to us at later stages. I mean, we're all thinking hard about and doing lots of work in early cancer detection, and a big part of that is screening, in addition to early detection of cancer cells in the blood or in the urine.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think we as an industry and also as the ecosystem, I think we should all take a step back and try to take the learnings from the pandemic and to see what we need to change, because it's really up to us, and to think about new rules and new mechanisms, new playbooks that we want to implement in the post-COVID world. I completely agree, you know, with what was said before the information. Jennifer, I really applaud your initiative, for instance, the transparency around some of these things. That's exactly the type of culture that we need in healthcare. Transparency creates speed and agility, allows us to move faster, and ultimately allows the best solutions to win. And obviously there you know, need to be exactly solutions like you are proposing to create that type of transparency. So I think these are really important initiatives. But I think we need to all take a step back and talk to our stakeholders, and to you know, to make sure that the learnings from the pandemic that showed the deficiencies and where we had the breakpoints in the system, that they are addressed in a pragmatic way over the next few years. And you know, because if we want to just go back to how we were in 2019, I think we're going to miss a huge opportunity to take this the healthcare industry in general forward. Again, we are tasked. We are such a big part of the GDP. We all know that there were inefficiencies in the system. And this is now the opportunity to also, you know, to take our responsibility very seriously to change this going forward, and to implement better speed, better quality, using new technologies, new tools, and thereby improve healthcare altogether.
We have to remove financial barriers, and you know, we realized that at Dana-Farber, and we did that by forming an alliance with Boston Medical Center, which is very, very diverse community, and signing on to their Boston to BMC healthcare net. We also have committed a very substantial amount of funds towards ID&E at Dana-Farber.
Yeah.
And thanks to a gift that we got from the Prostate Cancer Foundation, we're able now to be allied with the Boston VA, which again is a very diverse community. And we can bring those patients over here to put them on clinical trials if that's what's their best option.
Wonderful. Jennifer, I don't know if you'd like to add anything. I know you thought a lot about this.
Yeah.
And then on Ed.
Won't get in front of you, Ed. I always love what you have to say. Really quickly, I loved what Dr. Shibuya said about the importance of trust on health outcomes. And I think it's very relevant for what we're all talking about, right? So right now there's a real lack of trust in institutions, particularly large institutions, not just government, also life sciences sector, right? Pharma, biotech, and med device. You can summarize it in 4 numbers, 9, 91, and 19. 9% is the percentage of Americans that trust pharma companies are honest and ethical. 90% think they put profits before people. 1 is what the industry used to be up until about 19 years ago. You could find pharma ranking among the most admired companies and sectors in the world. And so with this growing distrust, you have to ask, why do we have this growing distrust? And what are we really aiming for? And we're not aiming for just trust, right? Because you can trust a used car salesman who sells you a lemon of a car. We really want trustworthiness. And so one of the reasons I started the Good Pharma Scorecard, seeing this lack of trust and understanding the importance of trust for people's health. When we don't trust sectors, we disengage, right? And in pharma, you see vaccine hesitancy, hesitancy to participate in trials, list goes on, right? You lose a social license to operate in some senses. And so you want to think about how we can appropriately repair this. How can we earn merited trust? How can we build trustworthiness into the sector and everything we do? And something we want to think about is that we're innovating, but we're leaving a lot of people behind, right? And everyone knows this, we've talked about it. And so something that we're trying to do with the Good Pharma Scorecard is kind of come up with this, like, what does good and trustworthiness look like? And how do we know when we've got there, right? Because you can't just be good. You also have to communicate it and signal it, right? In a way that is actionable for people so they can act on those trustworthiness signals. And just really quickly, even the funding, right, for where we're innovating, that is imbued in ethical decisions, right? If we're following, we had a huge discussion just now on the marketplace, right? What's profitable? What's profitable may not be what 90% of the world needs. So you want to think about how you're setting your research agendas, right? Not who's getting left behind, who are we treating and who aren't we? How we're designing our trials, who are we including, who aren't we, right? Dr. Gilmer just mentioned tend to test drugs on healthy young white males in high-income countries. How you're conducting it, transparency of information, and the accessibility, right? How we're pricing things, but more than that, anti-competitive practices and things like that. The more we can practice ethics, social responsibility, trustworthiness by design in everything we do, the more we'll have merited trust and uptake of products and hopefully a better health outcomes for everyone.
Dr. Abrams, and now for your statement too. The last shall be first, and the first shall be last.
And that's fine. I actually have a bit of a complementary perspective that may shed some light on the earlier discussion about how we change healthcare in the future, which I think is the subject of this panel. I was thinking about what technological breakthroughs are really going to drive medical advances in the future. And obviously came up with the obvious ones like artificial intelligence, CRISPR, immunology, cell and gene therapy. But it strikes me, especially listening to the comments that we've heard so far, that it's not necessarily true if we build it that they will come, that we have to structure the society, healthcare, to deliver maximum care.
Here's why I'm excited about RLT.
To the most amount of people. As Carlos said, I am president of the Personalized Medicine Coalition, and our mission is to raise the profile of what Dr. Glimcher and Per Schatz were talking about a few minutes ago. What is personalized or precision medicine? Essentially, we say it's linking therapy to diagnostics in order to get better outcomes and combining that with the patient's values, circumstances, etc. The second thing we do is to try to create a friendlier economic environment for investment in and adoption of personalized medicine. And finally, to develop the evidence that it works, because as everyone here knows far better than I, the medical system is skeptical, maybe with good reason, but it is deeply skeptical. And so we have to have evidence that what we're suggesting, that linking therapy to diagnostics to get better outcomes actually works. So payers especially aren't going to believe it, but neither are our providers. So what I'm suggesting is that we need to reconfigure or ask different questions than perhaps we've asked before. And Dr. Glimcher noted that sometimes immunotherapy works and sometimes it doesn't. We ought to be asking that about everything. And we ought to try to figure out why. And that obviously includes COVID as well. I mean, it's striking that the COVID experience is not universal. Some people got a mild cold, some people got nothing, and some people, even if they were aged, etc., died. We don't necessarily know why, but if we have the answers to these questions, I think we'll be better off. Now, we have to figure out how we can regulate these new products, especially how we can pay for them, and how we can convince providers to prescribe them, and how we can get people to say, is this going to work for this patient? And I think once we do that, all the great technologies and the golden age of research that we are experiencing will be accelerated. But we have to be willing to ask those questions. And they've come up in this conversation, especially, for example, around telehealth, linking therapy to diagnostics, regaining trust of the public. But they are extraordinarily important. And I encourage us to continue focusing on it.
I couldn't agree more. You know, I wanted to sort of take another theme that Pierre started, and it reminds me of something Mara Aspinall likes to say, which is that diagnostics.
Mara's one of the founders of the personalized medicine coalition.
That's why I mentioned it. Yeah, so the diagnostics is an informatics business with a wet lab attached, right? And the degree to which, as you begin to build the informatics space, how much of this can you, and maybe this also relates to Dr. Shibuya's point, as the data gets better, can you break through, right? And what does that evidence base need to look like?
The diagnostic industry needs to demonstrate its clinical utility in order to increase value and valuations.
Yeah, I mean, true, but I think there's also a point at which you move beyond high consolidation, low margins to say this is the basis upon which so much decision making gets made. So, how do you sort of socialize that cost, because the values going forward just compound. So, it's reminiscent of the press secretary. What do you want me to do? Like send everybody a COVID test? Yeah, that would be a good idea.
Especially when we didn't have vaccines, but even now it would help.
Yeah, no, and even from a business point of view, look, Livongo, right? What was the interesting thing that they did? They gave an infinite number of strips, right? And that actually made it again, Livongo was an informatics business with a wet lab, device attached, right? I mean, it really took that logic to the extreme. and potentially, really turned it into, to bring it to Othman's vision of a public health as a service that you could potentially scale, bringing delight to consumer patients.
And acquired by Teladoc.
And acquired by Telehealth, right? Exactly. I'm curious in the remaining time that we have, if we could, sort of look out 5, maybe even 10 years, and ask the following question. COVID has been, choose your analogy, the Trojan horse, the battering ram, whatever, that has disrupted and has now broken something in the system that potentially will lead to something new. I'd like to hear what I call the silver lining, and then maybe the dark. If people remember the Black Mirror TV show from Britain, I always found that, so maybe the high and the low. Maybe start with the high. What are the things that you're excited about that you see on the horizon over the next 5-10 years, and what are the things that really worry you, that concern you, that if we don't get ahead of, are going to make things worse in this post-pandemic world? And maybe what we'll do is just snake back in the way that we started. So Ed, I'll start with you, and then we can thread our way back. So you're high and you're low.
I think the good news on COVID is we demonstrated that by sharing value across silos, we can solve problems, namely developing vaccines. That's the high. The low is I see a retreat from doing that, because everybody has their own business model, and it's not easy to share either data or experience with others in order to get better outcomes for patients. And that remains very challenging. So I would come back to my central theme: how we organize medicine, meaning how it's regulated, paid for, prescribed, really makes a tremendous amount of difference. So I would not ignore public policy considerations or education. So I think we need to see how this is a shared ecosystem of value. We did that to develop the vaccines, and it remains to be seen if we can continue.
Excellent. Pierre, your thoughts, high and low.
So, well, the high is that the public has recognized the value of science and technology and the rapid adoption of those, that they can provide significant benefits. I think that's the public should not be underestimated here, the taxpayer in general. They will be expecting further solutions in this space to come forward for the benefit. The bad news is that I have not seen the ecosystem, regulators, payers, move as quickly as I would hope. And I would hope that the pandemic would serve as a stronger catalyst to make everybody recognize that there needs to be change compared to what we were experiencing pre-pandemic.
Excellent. Dr. Glimcher, I think popcorn to you.
I have to start out with the biggest threat for us all is climate change, because if we don't fix that, we can forget about future generations. And as a mother and a grandmother, this to me is like the number one issue. That's in the negative, but it needs to be in the positive. I also think that making the existence of COVID-19 really woke us up to the depth and breadth of the existence of structural racism and historically underserved communities. On the positive side, as Per said, the lay public now understands what scientists do far better than they did 3 years ago, I would say. There's really been an opening, an awakening of appreciation for what scientists do. And we need to continue to contact and to reach out to a lay audience to tell them why science is important. Artificial intelligence, NLP, I cannot even imagine what it's going to be like 5 years from now. I think it's hard for us to imagine the huge impact this is going to have, but it's really critical that experts in AI and NLP connect with the healthcare system if we really want to take that next step. There are so many buckets of data to be analyzed, but medical records, pathology, radiology, metabolomics, immunoprofile, genomic profile. We have to put these huge buckets of data. They have to be structured. We have to have algorithms that structure them so that we can figure out why some people respond to immunotherapy and some people don't respond. So I think that to me is and another very wonderful thing, which I think somebody else, I think Ed, you mentioned this, is we've developed vaccines in 10 months. Again, that's, you know, an announcement to the public that science is important.
And drag the world through telemedicine, kicking and screaming in 2-3
Yes.
weeks. So,
Yeah.
Dr. Shibuya, I think the popcorn goes to you in this reverse order.
Okay, so in terms of high, I think Mia just mentioned that, you know, people understand the value of science, but also people really understand that healthcare is a part of the social systems. You know, health cannot be separate from the social systems. The low side, I realize that people are really myopic right now on TV every day. You know, we hear most of the time we have heard about the COVID. Now we are always looking at you know, traumatic view from Ukraine, and everybody's just focusing on that. So I'm not so optimistic about prospect about pandemic preparedness and responses because I worked on the Ebola and we developed the CEPI, and we of course started investing in Moderna and others. But after 5 years, 2019, we are not well prepared. So after a couple of years, you know, already we are in the endemic phase of COVID. In several countries, which achieved high vaccine coverage, but you know, after a few years, one might forget what we had right now. So we have to, instead of waiting for the next couple of years, we have to act now to fix it.
Excellent. Othman, in reverse order, I think we unwind to you.
So I mean, I think on the optimistic side, I think kind of echoing what a lot of what's been said, but I think one of the things that the last couple of years have done is that they've maybe shown the art of the possible. I think there are just a lot of things where, you know, prior, like whether it were, you know, studies or trials that we were involved with, et cetera, you know, the logistics and the kind of some of the basic like blocking and tackling we're seeing oftentimes the big hurdles, and that some things that in the big scheme of things turn out to be, you know, very eminently doable, you know, were seen as very long and slow barriers. Whereas, you know, looking back at the last couple of years, I mean, it's, you know, echoing kind of what Dr. Glimcher said about, you know, the inequity of care. That being said, like, I think it is quite remarkable that over the last 2 years, you know, billions of vaccines have been administered, probably tens of billions of tests have been, you know, done worldwide, where like, I don't think there's ever been any single kind of instance of care delivery that's been done at this scale in human history. And that I think that is actually, I think, a pretty remarkable kind of step that has happened. And I think sometimes, like, you know, infrastructure that gets created out of crises ends up being durable long-term infrastructure, like, you know, the highway system in the US being a byproduct of the Second World War and things like that. Like, I think oftentimes, you know, big crises kind of catalyze a stepping over some steps that like otherwise would never get enough activation energy to be made. And so I think that from an optimistic standpoint, I think, like, you know, we've been forced to make very long overdue investments that maybe we're not like obviously done in a, you know, in a crisis situation, so not ideal, but like I don't think, you know, you ever choose to do these things in an ideal situation anyways. And so, but on the optimistic side, I do think like a lot of what's been created has been turned out to be quite durable. Maybe mostly, especially even in people's heads, right? Like, it's kind of, people's expectations have completely changed. I think, like, you know, it's like, hey, you could vaccinate me conveniently for COVID. How come, you know, my kid's school can't do all their, you know, flu shots and Tdap, you know, et cetera, like in a convenient way that doesn't require me to take time off work, drive, you know, somewhere and so on. I think those expectations changing, I think, are actually some of the more kind of valuable and durable changes. I mean, to Pierre's point, like, you know, it's kind of the, you know, people fundamentally, I think, voting with their feet in different countries with different systems and so on, but fundamentally the will and the demands of people for how they receive health, basic health services, I think, is probably, you know, evolved quite a bit. I mean, I think the biggest challenge, frankly, is like the politicization and the kind of a lot of things that should be just like basic scientific, rational discussions, you know, unfortunately, the last, you know, few years have turned into, you know, somewhat, you know, ridiculous, nonsensical debates that are much more kind of partisan, as opposed to being kind of like just, I think that's frankly, I think our biggest challenge, whether it's in healthcare or in climate change and so on. Like, I think that's personally the thing I'm most concerned about, is just the inability for collective rational debate and decision making. So it's kind of, but it's not just a healthcare issue, I think, but it does impact, I think, health. One of the biggest things that impacts healthcare, I think.
Excellent. Dr. Miller, to you.
I think a challenge for us is the changing landscape of healthcare, right from, you know, a doctor-patient relationship to a very complex, interconnected ecosystem. And with that come a lot of new players who may have thought of themselves as more in the maker of widgets space rather than in medicine, which we've often thought of as at the service of helping and healing sick patients for people, right? And so as we move forward, I think we want to think about how we can advance an ethos of helping, healing, and curing for all patients going forward. And in terms of highs, I think, ironically, all of the complaints that you're hearing right now about the system are very hopeful and optimistic, because inherent in a complaint is a vision or an expectation that things not only should be better, but that they can be better. So I hope that, you know, we can collaborate together and start repairing some of those relationships and bonds that have crumbled over time on all levels of society, and collaborate to sort of ensure that we're moving for an ethos of helping, healing, curing all people, not just some people in healthcare.
Excellent. Professor Sankai, we'd like to give you the last word.
Oh, thank you so much. So anyway, today I could discuss about such kind of telemedicine and telehealth care. And today I explained about the entrance or introduction of telemedicine and telehealth care in the treatment in diagnosis. And currently, so all detected data from the personal patients now belongs to the individuals. Then I think, so these accumulated data will be analyzed automatically, and also with a transparency, because the if these data are accumulated in the special companies or special organization, then it's really difficult to open these data. Then, so I recommend these data belongs to the personal. And so, okay, and by from us, okay, in order to promote the next generation telemedicine or telehealth, at that time, so currently, one doctors will treat the patients through the internet and so on, but number of medical doctor and patients is completely different. Then the AI system will be used. Then at that time, validity of the AI diagnosis or treatment strategy, it should be analyzed and discussed with the another independent organization and so on. Then we had better established the next generation medical and healthcare strategies with some special teams and so on. So today, anyway, so all of the very distinguished doctors explained about the different aspects to discuss about the next medicine and so on. So I just summarized my talk. Thank you. Yes.
Well, thank you, everybody. I think this has been an extraordinarily interesting discussion. I'm so thrilled by the quality of everybody's engagement. I'm just thank you for all your thoughts and thank you for sharing. This is, I think, recorded on and should be on YouTube, so you should be able to have a record of it for posterity. So thank you all. And,
Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos, for getting us all together.
So,
my pleasure.
thank you.
Nice to see you all again. Thank you.
I hope we can do it outside the metaverse at some point in vivo. So with that, I'll draw this to a close and thank you all and stay safe.
Mhm.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.